Okay, so these image patterns continue in Kicking the Leaves, which is a longer poem. It's one of my favorite poems. So first, before we get into all the image patterns, like all the images speaking to each other, I just want to pick out an image that maybe doesn't appeal to our eyesight, but appears to a different sense. So in the middle, if you can see it here, I kick at the leaves, making a sound I remember as the leaves swirl upward from my boot and flutter. I remember Octobers, walking to school to Connecticut, wearing corduroy knickers that swished with a sound like leaves. So that whole section, we have sort of the sound being an important part, right? So our sense of sound is one of our senses, and so I would consider that an image. It's not something that I can see, but I mean, if you've ever worn corduroy pants, you know what he's talking about, right? The swish, 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 that has to, even that word swish, it's a little onomatopoetic, which means it's a word that sort of enacts the sound that it's supposed to represent. So we have the swishing of the corduroy knickers, which is sort of like the sound of the leaves itself. So there's an example of an image that, I would call it an image even though it's not something that has to do with our visual sense. If we go to the next page of the packet, this is a very busy page, and so I'm going to talk about a few different connections that I see in images going on here. So I'll scroll it over and we'll take a look. So this is in section 2. One November, I drove up from college to see them, meaning his grandmother and grandfather, okay, who were living in New Hampshire. So one November, I drove up to see them. Now, if we scroll down to the third section, so we're talking about college there, right? Now, third section. One Saturday when I was little, before the war, my father came home at noon from his half day at the office and wore his Bates sweater, black on red, with the crossed hockey sticks on it. This is a fantastic image, I think, because I can just picture, we've got the colors, which is great, but I can picture the crossed hockey sticks on it, right? I can just picture, especially because this is probably, 50s, 60s, I can just picture like a retro sweatshirt like that you might pick up in a Goodwill or something right now. So there's a fantastic image, and does anybody know what Bates is? We're not talking about the Bates Motel. This is actually college, all right? So Bates College, and it might require a little bit of extra information from the part of you, the reader. Maybe it wouldn't when the poem first came out, but we're talking about Bates College. So, the father sort of reliving his glory days. I've got a bunch of Knox College gear in my house at home. You guys, when you get older, will probably have, stuff from whatever college you went to. So Bates College. So in section 2, we have an allusion to college. Section 3, we have college here. And if we go to the next column on this page, which is in section 4, my son, flamboyant as maple, 20, visits from college and walks ahead of us, his steps springing, impatient to travel the woods of the earth. So in this page, and then 3 different sections, we're talking about college. And we're not talking about, maybe that repetition is not all that surprising to you, but it's actually in 3 different contexts. It's in 3 sections, and we're talking about 3 different generations, right? One November, I drove up from college to see them. That's the speaker talking about his own experience. He was in college driving back to see his grandparents. Section 3, he's talking about his father wearing his Bates College sweater, right? And then in section 4, we're talking about the son. So we've been able to capture all of these different generations. It's actually 4, right? So we have the grandparents, the speaker visiting the grandparents, and we have the father, we've had the speaker, and now we have the son. So this idea of generations is really important. And this image of, and maybe you wouldn't call it an image of college, I think the image of the sweatshirt is definitely an image, and that's one thing that's never left me, probably one of my favorite images in poetry. But it's at least this idea of college, right, that's threaded through parts of the poem, and so that helps tie it together. Again, we don't have an identifiable form that's consistent, but we do have ideas and images that are speaking to each other. If you go on to take other literature courses, you might hear that phrase, things are speaking to each other, and it feels organic. It's not just like a bunch of random things cobbled together. There's some sort of plan or connection throughout the poem. So there's one, this idea of college, and if we had to encapsulate that in the image, I think it would be in the college sweatshirt. There's something else going on. So let's read. Well, we've already talked about the sweatshirt, so let's go back there. I'll read that section for you again. One Saturday, when I was little before the war, my father came home at noon from his half day at the office and wore his Bates sweater, black on red with the crossed hockey sticks on it and raked beside me in the backyard. Okay, so we have the image of the crossed hockey sticks and they're raking. Now let's go back up to section 2. Where are we? This is actually right underneath the line we quoted earlier when we were talking about college. One November I drove up from college to see them. We pulled big rakes. We pulled big rakes as we did when we hayed in summer, pulling the leaves against the granite foundations around the house, on every side of the house, and then, to keep them in place, we cut spruce boughs and laid them across the leaves, green on red, until the house was tucked up, ready for snow. Okay, so in the part I quoted from section 3, the Bates sweater, black on red with the crossed hockey sticks on it, and he raked beside me in the backyard. This quote begins, we pulled big rakes, this is the speaker and his grandparents, as we did when we hayed in the summer. Then they cut spruce boughs and laid them across the leaves, green on red. Okay? So it's a subtle connection, but we have sort of the structure of the language is similar, we have colors again being used, and we have like the intersection, like geometry again, right? The geometry of the poem is being echoed. So the repetitions. We have the image, the crossed image, we have crossed hockey sticks, and then we have spruce boughs being laid across the leaves underneath. We have black on red, the Bates sweater black on red, and we have green on red when we lay the boughs on the leaves. And we have raking in both sections too. And those are subtle things. There might be things that you don't pick up on. And if you don't pick up on them, that's fine. It's not, doesn't make you a bad literature student or a bad reader if you're not picking up on those things. But it's just one of those, this is something that a poet will do or a writer will do. They'll drop subtle hints, right? This sort of keeps everything feeling like everything is connected, okay? So it doesn't feel like a big leap when we go from one section to another to another. Things are sort of being echoed, they're being tied back together. And that happens again. So we'll go back to section 3. Lots of stuff happening in the middle of the poem. So we'll pick up with the end of the Bates sweater thing. So the crossed hockey sticks on it, he raked beside me in the backyard and tumbled in the leaves with me, laughing, and carried me, laughing, my hair full of leaves to the kitchen window. Okay? My hair full of leaves. Now we'll scroll down to section 4. Kicking the leaves today as we walk home together from the game, among crowds of people with their bright pennants, as many and bright as leaves. My daughter's hair is the red-yellow color of what? Wait for it. Birch leaves. And she is tall like a birch, growing up, 15, growing older. Okay, so in section 3, the speaker's hair is full of leaves. In section 4, my daughter's hair is the red-yellow color of birch leaves. So another connection, okay? And it's not really explicit. It's not the poet hitting you over the head like, oh my God, here's the metaphor, here's the connection if you don't get it. They're subtle, okay? They're things you might not get, but it helps give the poem this sort of connective tissue that holds it all together, okay? Just like, we had the geometry and maple syrup of people sort of descending, we have all these other connections and kicking the leaves going on. Here's a minor one, but we're talking about, we're talking about the daughter and the son. My daughter's hair is the red-yellow color of birch leaves, and she's tall like a birch growing up, 15 growing older. And my son, flamboyant as maple, 20, visits from college. So flamboyant is this word. And then on page 7, now I fall, now I leap and fall to feel the leaves crash under my body, to feel my body buoyant in the ocean of leaves. So that's subtle too, but the flamboyant and buoyant are not really common words. And so just the repetition of that sound, and even the entire word buoyant basically is in both of those words, another type of subtle connection that's holding these things together. It's not really a rhyme, they're separated kind of far, but one word sort of speaks back to another word, right? So it's just another way of the poem sort of holding itself together. It's a long poem, it's 7 sections, it spans a few pages, but it doesn't feel like a short story, right? It jumps around, but it doesn't feel entirely random either, and I think it's because of some of the things that the poet's doing to keep everything feeling organic, like it all belongs.